If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Welcome to another episode of Rounding Up the Roundhouse, the Albuquerque Journal's podcast on the legislative session. I am Dan Boyd, and I am joined today by Senator Crystal Brantley. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Senator Brantley is a second-term senator from Elephant Butte who represents a district that stretches all the way from Catron County to Las Cruces. And I guess jumping right in, we got 1 week to go here in the 30-day session. How are you kind of feeling about how the session has gone so far and, what's yet to be done?
Well, Dan, this is a budget year. And so typically we don't see so many policy bills. And maybe perhaps it's because it's the governor's last year. She has given a message to a lot of bills. I have to tell you, I'm happy about some of those because many of them are mine. But that means that we started really fast right out of the gate. And so things have been it just seems like it's going at warp speed for better or worse. Some of the big highlights, SB 3 right out of the gate was harm to self and others, Senator Maestas and myself. And it looks like that's getting through the House now. It just came over to the Senate for concurrence. That's a big ask for our law enforcement and our public safety issues. And we appreciate the governor for giving that bill a message. It'll certainly be able to help, a number of our people who are having mental health episodes on the street to get to the resources and the access that they need. And it better equips our law enforcement as well. We've had a number of good public safety bills that are moving and still traveling through, so I'm hopeful about that. But also we're keeping our eye on a number of stuff that we're not so optimistic about. It looks like we're at a good place right now with Med-Mal, but we're closely watching that to make sure that the trial attorneys, don't kind of mess that up by the time it gets to us, because the reality is that whether you're urban or rural, we are coming to New Mexico with a mandate that people need access to doctors. And so I would say public safety and Med-Mal reform really were mandates from New Mexico voters.
And wanted to ask you, healthcare has obviously been a high priority issue. The session, you mentioned the medical malpractice bill, also some medical compact bills. Do you think, if legislators are able to pass kind of the medical malpractice legislation in addition with some other measures, that'll really make a difference in this healthcare provider shortage around the state, and especially in rural areas?
It will make a difference. But look, all of these compacts that we're passing don't make a difference. Just extending the invitation for doctors from other states to come here and practice won't matter if we don't reform Med-Mal, because there's not an incentive to come here. So it's like, thanks for the invitation, but we don't want to be there if we can get our pantsuit off. And we understand that. And so where we really hope is that we can come to some sort of agreement when it comes to medical malpractice, to cap those rates for both doctors and hospitals, just like other states are, all over the nation, so that we can attract medical professionals to come here and want to practice in New Mexico. Look, I'm sure in Albuquerque, people recognize the shortage and the delays that it takes to get in to see a doctor. Well, that's exacerbated in rural New Mexico because we don't even have a primary healthcare physician at this point, and we are traveling 4, 5, 6 hours. And now we're waiting 4, 5, 6 months to travel those hours to get in. And so we're in a healthcare crisis in New Mexico. And that is because lawmakers have got us here by making sure that our medical laws favor trial attorneys and not our healthcare providers.
I wanted to ask you, you represent a district that was long held by a conservative Democrat, John Arthur Smith, who passed away a few years ago. Have you tried to carry on his approach a little bit about crossing party lines at times, and how difficult is it to kind of find bipartisanship in this current political environment that we're in?
It's a lot easier to find bipartisanship and common ground outside of the roundhouse. I think that good policy gets hijacked by politics once we come in here. But when we go back to our districts, I think most people find themselves in the middle. Everybody genuinely wants the best for New Mexico. They want the best for their families. They want healthy families. They want safe communities. And so I think that sometimes politics really just plays a part when we're here in this roundhouse, unfortunately. I like you mentioned, was elected by Democrats. I'm proud to represent a very large rural district. I think I still carry the values and the voice that my predecessor, Senator John Arthur Smith, did when it comes especially to fiscal policy and conservative policy on our funding and budgeting. But I think that the reality is that most New Mexicans find themselves in the middle. And unfortunately, we get up here to Santa Fe and you get lawmakers that are just polar extremists. And we don't seem to get much done because we fall victims to just politics.
Oh, that's interesting. And I know you have had a few bills. I think you had one yesterday with Senator Maestas that you sponsored on the Senate floor dealing with kind of officer training requirements and things like that. So certainly it seems like the spirit of bipartisanship is still alive and well, at least on certain issues. Wanted to ask you, Senator, as well. You've been involved for 2 years now on legislation dealing with cell phones in schools. Wanted to ask you a little bit, what you could tell listeners about that and kind of how it came about.
That's another bipartisan effort. I've teamed up with Senator Maestas last year. We're doing it again this year because last year was just really strong encouragement to our school districts. What we did is we rolled out the data to show them that the average teenager is spending 5, 6, 7 hours a day on their phone. And it's not just their phone. It's on dangerous social media apps. It's a distraction from not just the learning environment in their classroom, but they're losing out on face-to-face peer interaction and the mental health aspects and the negative consequences of what's happening to our teen generation. It really is an addiction. And so if the schools can step in and recognize that for 6 hours a day, we are managing those children. We have the opportunity and the responsibility to not just provide a good opportunity, but to disconnect them from that social world. And so it was a strong encouragement for schools to adopt policies to have phone-free classrooms. Now, the good schools did it. And in fact, many at the time already had some sort of no phone policy. The reality is we still have a number of districts who are not addressing any sort of phone rules at all. And so we're coming in this time saying, look, the data speaks to itself. As much as I hate to put a mandate on a school district, when we know that there are positive outcomes, we know that the consequences of enacting this rule will make a difference. We're coming in and saying, okay, at this point, we're demanding that the cell phones be put up during classroom hours.
And I know you're a mom in addition to being a senator. Are you getting lobbied at home, by your daughters against this bill, or do they kind of agree with you?
Yes. The biggest opposition is my 15 and 16-year-old daughters. Every time we hear this bill in committee, I'm scared to death that they're going to be on the Zoom opposing this bill. But, all seriousness aside, I think I run a pretty tight ship at my own house. And when I have seen over the years the addiction that starts to come to these phones, and when my own daughters will show up at a dinner table and think that they have the right to pull out a phone that would distract them and take them away from the family time, I realize just how bad this has become, because that is not going to be tolerated at home when it's important to have face-to-face and real communication with our children, and it certainly should not be happening in the classrooms. And it's the number one ask from our teachers. And if our teachers are saying, please help us fight these cell phone addictions, it's exactly what we need to do. I mean, New Mexico is ranked last in education. Heaven knows we'll take anything that might help.
I'm sure it sounds like their lobbying efforts still, need to go a little bit further to win you over. But you started off talking a little about public safety and some of the bills that have moved forward this year. I know there is legislation dealing with firearms that passed a House committee last night, and it's already passed the Senate. It seems like that bill as well has drawn a lot of concern and opposition. What's your take on if that bill is enacted and signed into law? What might end up happening?
So that's SB 17, and it mirrors very much, it looks like a Go Safe Act. It has a magazine restriction. I think it caps it to 10 rounds. It also outlaws, some weapons that they're defining as weapons as war, ARs. We know that those are commonly used weapons. And based on the definition of that bill, it would actually pick up a number of very commonly used firearms. Here's the message out there is that that's the easy way out that lawmakers are taking it, because doing the tough work means we have to sit down and fight crime. But it is much easier for us to target the lawful than it is to hold the unlawful accountable. And to say that that's a public safety bill is actually offended, because it's offensive because it's not going to do a darn thing to address public safety. I have no doubt that bill will be overturned. We saw Democrats have a history now of passing some unconstitutional bills, and the courts have agreed with us. We saw that with the 7-day waiting period, and I have no doubt that this bill bill also will be overturned. But in the meantime, New Mexicans have to operate in this gray area where they don't really know what the law is. We have courts that say it's unconstitutional. We have New Mexico state lawmakers that say it is law. And in the meantime, we're doing nothing to address our crime crisis. Until we start focusing on the criminal, we're not going to make a bit of difference when it comes to crime.
And I wanted to ask you another big bill that actually, was failed on the Senate floor yesterday was the Clear Horizons Act dealing with climate change and emission levels. I was intrigued by kind of the final vote count on that bill, that 7 Democrats, joining with Republicans and voting against it. Were you kind of surprised at how that went down, or were you expecting, given the opposition to that legislation, that it might,
The
that it might fail?
The opposition down on that bill was so wide. We had everyone from tribal nations who were lobbying us against it. Of course, the oil and gas industry, our agricultural sector, because it was so overreaching and broad that just all industries would be impacted by that. And at the end, it really does nothing when it comes to environmental benefits here. And so I think that a number of Democrats recognize that. I did think it was going to have a hard time getting over, and the votes fell really right where we thought it would. So we are happy to see that bill died yesterday. If you'll recall, right before that, I had a pretty important law enforcement bill that should help with some public safety and improving the training of law enforcement. I was also happy to see that bill was passed with such broad bipartisan support. I thought that was going to be a pretty tough fight as well. And yesterday was just a full day of surprises, but it was a good day. I turned around in Senate Judiciary. We had another really big, heavy lift. I want to credit Senator Trujillo, who is taking the lead on changing the definition of serious youth offender. I was happy to co-sponsor that with her because, as you know, I represent Joniana County. And in the wake of the Young Park shooting, we had teenagers killing teenagers. And those killers had a very long, violent criminal history, and we never stepped in to intervene. They should have never escalated to a point where they could murder that many people and shoot that many people at a park on a Friday night that we all know and feel safe in. And so having to come in and address the juvenile violence that is taking over New Mexico, I'm so happy to team up with Senator Trujillo. What she's doing is she's expanding the number of crimes for the definition of both youth offender and serious youth offender. And it's not just a public safety concern to keep our communities safe, but it's also an opportunity to intervene in these children's lives early and hopefully course correct their life and the path that they're choosing to go down to before it reaches such a violent crime as first-degree murder.
And interestingly, I think the trial for one of the defendants in that Young Park shooting just began this week. Are you more optimistic? Obviously, public safety. There's been frustration on that issue in recent sessions, both by the governor, some of your Republican colleagues, and even some Democrats. Are you? I know a lot of things are still up in the air with a week left. Are you optimistic that some of these bills might make it across the finish line this year?
Hoping, I'm not. I don't often compliment the governor through the years, and I've been very critical of her leadership when it comes to CYFD. I will, though, give her some credit that this year she's given another number of public safety bills that are very important a message. And it is the last opportunity before she leaves office for us to do some really meaningful changes when it comes to public safety. I'm optimistic some of those get through, but I can't tell you what some of these, far left radical progressives think. They just don't think that anyone should ever be behind bars. And the reality is we're not putting in the investments for mental health to provide any other sort of resources for people. And so New Mexico continues to just be plagued by violent crime. And it's up to lawmakers to come in and really make some change here. This is not just an Albuquerque problem. Crime is now seeped to every corner of New Mexico, and every small town is just inundated by criminal activity because we refuse to have any accountability in this state.
And you mentioned CYFD issues as well. I know that's an issue you've worked on in previous years. It doesn't seem like this year that there's as many high-profile bills dealing with CYFD that are moving. I mean, is some of that due, do you think, just to the fact that this is the governor's last year and that there'll be someone new, taking office come January of next year?
Yes, but it's such a shame because I will tell you, in the meantime, our most vulnerable population of children continue to die. We just got a message this week that a mother had left an infant in a porta potty in Las Cruces that died. And I think it's just so sad that we have not come in. We've had some wins with CYFD since I've been a lawmaker. This is my 6th session. One of the biggest wins was the creation of the Child Ombudsman, which is just now taking shape. But the reality is until that agency can adopt and understand that the priority and the mission of that agency is to consider the best interest of the child. That bill exists and it has not been given a message. Right now, the mission of the agency is based on reunification. So at all costs, they are focused on reuniting that child with their biological parents. Well, in many cases here, the biological parents are the offenders. And so they're often returning that child to an unsafe home way too early. We just want the agency to step back and say what would be in the best interest of the child. It seems like common sense for those of us because a lot of these things are just head scratchers. Why would they return a child to a situation? We hear the gory details of what happens. And so, that's not a Democrat or a Republican issue. People are tired of turning on this TV and hearing about, another dead child, especially when CYFD should have, could have, and did not intervene.
Well, Senator, before we let you go here, we usually like to end the podcast asking legislators with kind of what's your go-to snack at the Roundhouse, and especially with a week left, to getting through those long days and long evenings in the Senate. Is there kind of a snack or a drink that helps kind of keep you going, or?
Well, I'm a Red Bull addict, so my refrigerator here, and it has a welcome sign for any of our law enforcement in the building. I think any of the staff, I am a Red Bull addict. I know it's unhealthy, but I have Pearson's Farm, who is a beef jerky manufacturer in Socorro County. They're big. They're all in Loves and Cabela's now, and they just came and brought each legislator an over-the-top beef jerky, duck jerky, elk jerky. We have meat sticks like crazy, so at least we're getting our protein to keep us going through. So I appreciate having, especially because it's in my district, but they have stocked every one of these offices to kind of keep us fueled, and so I appreciate that.
I'll know where to stop by your office if I need a snack over the next week. So
please do, please do.
Well, Senator Brantley, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and talk about some of these important issues that are happening at the Roundhouse.
Thank you. I appreciate media being here too, and I hope for all your listeners, they recognize and remember that we are just the messengers, and the message needs to come from our constituents. So people need to get involved. They need to contact their lawmakers. They need to make themselves welcome in the people's house here, get engaged in this process. We still have a week left, and their voice can make an influence. So thank you guys for getting that message out.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for listening. We'll be covering the final week of the session. You can find stories at abqjournal.com, and you can find these podcast episodes on our website or on YouTube and Spotify. And thanks again for joining us, and thanks to everyone for listening.